Okay, Pedro, thank you so much for doing this. Like I said, you are one of the persons that I quote the most. So, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Let's start with where you were born, where you live now, and maybe some anecdote that connects the two places.
Well, hello, and thanks for inviting me. I'm not sure I'm going to be as interesting as you expect, but I'll do my best. And I'm originally Spanish. I was born in Madrid, and after living in many countries, I've decided to move back to Madrid. Basically, I came back for New Year's Eve one year when I lived in San Francisco, and I met my wife. And I sold everything I had in San Francisco, and I stayed here, and I married her, and now I have two beautiful children with her.
Wow, this is a beautiful story. Going back home because of a girl, that's amazing. Pedro, so you have this very big smile on your face, so you look happy with everything. How do you see the world right now? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future?
I'm very optimistic. I think we are making a lot of progress, and I think we're making progress faster than ever. Um, I think humanity is all about first understanding what is this about, why we're here, and if we're alone, and then trying to build a better platform for survival for everybody, so we can leave a better world for the next generation. So I think we are in better conditions than ever to do that as a civilization.
And when you look at the future, do you identify challenges to to build this platform? What are the challenges on building this platform or
So
making it sustainable?
for me, yeah, you actually mentioned a very interesting word that's coming up very frequently now, which is sustainability. Uh, and as many words, it starts with a definition that seems very narrow. When people think about sustainability, they often think about the environment or maybe climate. But to me, sustainability is about what I just said, like making sure that what we're doing now is possible in the future, and that we're leaving a better scenario, which can be inside your company, inside your city, inside the planet, for the generations to come or the next one to take your seat. Um, so um, so yeah, I think that's a very interesting thing now to think about. After coming out of the COVID crisis, and one of the biggest challenges I find is that, look, through the human behavior, we've built a very dynamic society, which is very good because we are now able to act really fast and make progress really fast. So this dynamism has been responsible for us being able to, detect the virus, the COVID-19 virus, sequence it, and then build a vaccine, and then build a global production platform in a very, very short span of time, which actually I think is going to be the foundation for the next generation of health, how we're going to respond to viruses in the future. So actually the investment we made to respond to COVID-19 has been really, really powerful because it has brought the whole planet to the next level for virus response. So dynamism is really good because it has allowed us to make progress faster than ever, and also do it in a coordinated manner. So it's speed plus coordination that makes dynamism, that makes our society dynamic. But at the same time, we're seeing that the capacity we have as a civilization to respond uh, in a uniform way at the same time, together and in synchrony, can be very damaging, or can be very dangerous, because we're now so powerful that we can hurt the climate, that we can hurt the ocean, that we can pollute, that we can spread a virus with the wrong intentions, that we can generate a weapon that can that can kill a civilization. So the contrast or the conflict between sustainability, which is long-term thinking, and dynamism, which is short-term response, is the problem. And this is what the conversation is going to be about in the future. This works as a government, This works, if you're the president of a country. This works if you're the mayor of a city. This works if you're a father in a family, and this works if you're the CEO of a company. So how do you accommodate long-term strategy and long-term thinking with short-term response and dynamism? So as a company, for example, you can become obsolete in less than 12 months because there's a new disruptive company that comes in and breaks your market. And at the same time, you need to be thinking in long-term in all these frameworks of sustainability on how you're behaving and how you're creating good for the planet, how you're creating good for your employees, how you're creating good for your customers and your users. So for me, the leadership skills that are going to be demanded in the future are those that combine these two perspectives, short and long term, and not only the skills of the leaders, but also the structures that prove to be efficient and useful in the next few years are going to be the ones that tackle that double objective at the same time.
And what do you think? So like it's complicated, right? How do you do this risk management? So like when you say, okay, what's the long-term goals, sustainability, and yes, you're right, sustainable has been kind of right jacket for the environmental aspect, but it is social, environmental, and financial, right? So that's what makes something unsustainable. But what you're saying is that we need to have this long-term view of sustainability, but we need to be fast and to have a fast response. Is this risk management? Is this different incentives? So how can we balance the two? Is like not focusing so much on efficiency and maybe focusing at least some part of your efforts in resilience, right? And having this, how do you say, the word is, I'm lacking the word, redundancy, that will allow us, like to be more resilient in face of a crisis. Because I still look at the world and see a lot of concerns over the short term, right? The next quarter, the investments that are going to pay back sooner than later. And okay, maybe you have a few SpaceX companies that allow for a business models that are going to pay back in decades, but most of the cases we are looking into short-term interests. What is this balance? And if you can, elaborate a little bit more. And I'm asking this because I know that your work is related to helping companies forecast this balance, these goals, right?
Yeah, and I mean, this dilemma has always existed. As a scientist, that you always have to think about, should I spend more money on preventing people from dying of hunger, or should I actually invest in building an agricultural sector in a country so that there's a self-sustainable? So if I do the first one, nobody will die, and the results will be very positive in the short term, but they will be dramatic in the long term. You're feeding fish instead of teaching to fish, so to say. But if you do the second one, you're going to be extremely unpopular, and actually is going to be dramatic from a human standpoint in the short term, because people will die, although you have the money to save them, but you're investing in the long term. So I've come to the conclusion that I found a word that is what actually drives me nuts these days, and I'm obsessed with this thinking, which is hybrid. The future is going to be hybrid, and there are different strategies to navigate this hybrid world, and depending on your conditions, you're going to have advantages or disadvantages. I'll give you a very stupid example, but as the world became more sophisticated, and you'll see in different trends, you can see it in fashion, you can see it in music. Hipsters happened because everything was so techy, was so perfect, was so square, was so digital, that it disappeared, and it lost all the romanticism. So you have people that were, we're missing the old times when you had a vinyl record, and when you would make your own cigarettes, and when you would sit for hours to speak with a friend, which are kind of the values that are embedded in this new generation of hipsters. So you have this hybrid world where this guy owns vinyl records, but at the same time is a client of a platform like Spotify, and he will have both, right? And he will enjoy both. As a father, you will see that you will have to teach your kids and educate them on the now, on the here, on the physical family and environment, and go play with your ball outside and make friends. But at the same time, you want them to learn to code in artificial intelligence, or know what blockchain means, and be part of a community of creators, of makers that connects online and opens them to the world. So hybrid is also going to be about going back to the office, where we want to be surrounded by people and waste our time having coffee with somebody, because this is when serendipity happens, and this is when actually happiness happens. When you have these kind of experiences outside your home and outside your screen. But at the same time, you want to have this conversation with me 7,000 kilometers away in the same day. So the future is going to be hybrid. You're going to be playing with local things, physical things, old stuff, stuff that makes us human, with technical, tech-oriented, knowledge-based, virtual, global movements, trends, and tools that are going to make us better as a society. And I explained that I think that there are certain things that will allow you to be, tackling this double sided world better. And for example, I have to tell you, as a government or as an economy, size is one of them. So, I've been looking at, and this is one of the issues I was studying when we met at the Eisenhower Fellowship. I was studying the US response to the 2008 crisis. And from my perspective, it was really interesting because an old economy, an old society like the European Union responded to the beginning of the crisis trying to maintain our current business working, by incentivizing them. This is just a short crisis, you'll get over it. Here's some money, here's some incentives for you to recover. Where you would see that in the US, they set up all these ARPA agencies, these advanced research programs. They set up these huge incentives for new industries like the electric vehicle, gene sequencing, brain mapping, the private space industry, and many other new generation technologies that were going to build the basis of the competitiveness of the US in the next century, or at least in the next few decades. And at the same time, they had to cope with the whole automobile industry in Michigan and in Detroit going down. Yeah. So it's a completely different response. One of them is short term, the other one's long term. From a political standpoint, I'm really curious on how you can be in the position of being the president of the country and be betting on this very long term strategy, which is extremely unpopular on the short term. Say people are losing their jobs and people are losing their homes in a part of the country, and you're funding SpaceX to go explore Mars. How do you defend that? And you're losing all these jobs in companies like General Motors, Ford, but you're funding the electric vehicle, which is a promise, but may not become a successful technology in this competitive world that we live in today. So I think that making bets on the long term is very important. Having a long-term roadmap as a country, so having the intelligence to know what the trends are, what's going on, what other countries are doing, and having the guts to put some money where your mouth is, so now that you know what the world is going to be about in the next 50 years, now commit to it, and commit with important budget and with stability, which is another thing that's contrary to the structures that we have today. I talked about short term. So if you're a public company and you're publicly traded, the stock market and your shareholders are going to be looking at the next quarter. And many of them are, selling and buying in very short periods of time. So it's very important to explain and for them to see the results of long-term bets. So as a CEO, it's very difficult to be explaining or defending in the stock market to your shareholders your long-term bets. But also, what's interesting is that usually the structures that we have in companies put the older people at the top. And you would think this makes sense because these guys are the guys with the most experience. But these guys are the ones that are going to retire first. So many of them are interested in making bets that are going to pay off when he's gone. So he's going to take all the unpopularity at the beginning. And when he retires, this may be successful. So the structures that we have, for how companies are organized, how society and how politics works, how government works, the laws that we have don't allow long-term thinking. And this is going to become really important. And everybody has the mouth full of sustainability, but sustainability doesn't mean only being carbon neutral. It means having bets on technologies, having bets on science that is going to make you competitive as a society in the next few years, having bets on science that will solve the real problems that we have today, that people die of certain diseases, that people die of hunger, that people die because they don't have a home and they, and they live outside and they have all the kind of issues. So having this long-term view is very important. And what I found out is that only if you're a very large ship, you can allow to have long-term perspective. And this is why, the US was very interesting, but I find that the strategy that China is following is even more interesting, scary even to a point. This Belt and Road Initiative, if you look at it, it has a perspective embedded in it that is based on making China a competitive economy on the very long term and on a global scale. And everything they do is kind of following an agenda that doesn't change depending on, whatever laws there are, whatever somebody votes, because they don't need to care about that. So size matters a lot. And I'm speaking from Europe, where we have huge, local identities, and lots of regions want to become independent, and they think they're different from the rest, and they believe they can do better if they're on their own. And I think the future to which we're going is not a future of micro societies. It's a future of macro blocks that can allow to have this long-term perspective and commit to long-term objectives. So this is another vision of hybrid, how being local, but at the same time being large and having size enough to tackle these kind of challenges.
Okay, there are so many things that you said that I want to pinpoint. Let me see, where can we start? So you talked about unpopular decisions for this long-term view in the beginning, and at the same time we see the rise of celebrities, right? If you take a look at surveys on what kids want to be when they grow up, the number one choice is YouTuber, right? And you have these celebrities being considered to become the next president of the United States. So in somehow politics became a contest of popularity and you have this rise of celebrities. Do you think this that those two things are related? That yes, politicians are not as stupid as we think they are. They know what they have to do. They just don't have the guts to go through. They just don't want to. They are not incentivized for this long term, and everyone is competing somehow for the short term popularity. So
Well,
this is
I want to
one
go
of
back
the.
to the explanation I was giving before, because I do think that in all democracies, and even in outside democracies, what leaders explain and what the leaders do are two different things. So to me, there are two different kinds of societies or countries: those who have a long-term plan and those who don't. So having a long-term plan means, having or spending time and resources in building the intelligence to know what's going on and what's going to happen in the future and what role you want to play in that future. And then having the tools and the commitment to build a long-term plan that is bigger than your leadership. And what I've seen is that in some countries, I was a student in France, for example, and I lived in the US for a long time. There are structures that go beyond whoever's in power. So the long-term view on energy, for example, in France, on their bet on nuclear energy, is stronger than whoever's on running the country. Or on defense, how they view their dum-dum territories and the structure of the country. The long-term view of the role of the US in the world is larger than the role of a president. So he may do some, theater in public, but there's organisms behind building the intelligence to feed him with the right knowledge about, this is where the limits are, and this is where we stand, and this is what you have to know. And in Spain, this is something that I'm missing a lot, that whoever's in charge is completely volatile, because there's no view and there's no matters of state. So matters of state is the block of things that you put together, like on your long-term view of the country, and that you're able to adopt even if you are not, completely aligned with them, because you're committed with long-term plan. So for example, the structure of the education system in Spain, it really depends on whoever's the president, and it changes every 4 years. This is not good for a system where, the education takes, 15 years of your time. So if they're changing it every 4 years, the whole country's a mess.
Yes.
And then if you have 5 national identities inside the country, it becomes even a bigger mess. So that education should be a matter of state, as well as defense, as well as health, as well as most of the international relations. So I think that there are countries that have that, and countries that don't. Even in democracies, you have countries that alternate between one party and the other, and one country, one leader or the other, but some things stay the same in the long term. And this is going to really matter. And you're a scientist, so you know that you could not change the policy on science every 4 years.
Yes. That this is one of the matters that should be a matter of state. Mm-hmm. I have a question on this hybrid hypothesis. What I like about it is that I don't think we are going to have a world of average. Okay, that things are going to be linear, and that we are going to reach like an average. Everything is going to be on the average. I believe more in. Well, we can look at the average, but the reality is that we are, like in choosing one thing or another. Like you said, today I want to listen to my vinyl records. Tomorrow, I'm not going to be at home, and I want to have my Spotify. So you're not going to have a system that is going to be homogeneous. So maybe like better than average, it's not going to be homogeneous. It's going to be heterogeneous, and you will be able to jump from one thing or another according to what's more convenient and what's going to be comfortable or what makes you happy in that moment, because we are like this, right? We are more heterogeneous. At the same time, this and I like also that this creates redundancy. And I believe that we have been focusing so much on efficiency that if something breaks, then it's you break, okay? Because there's not so many redundancy mechanisms. And when you look at nature, that it's a very resilient uh, um, um, sector, let's say, it has a lot of redundancy. And of course, it comes with a high cost of energy, but well, that you can see as a waste, right? But it's not a waste if it brings you the safety of resilience through redundancy. But being hybrid, does it mean being dispersed, like this disperse energy into all these different things that are going to allow for hybrid and redundancy? Does it prevent us from being focused? Because somehow focus is something that's very important for innovation, for companies. I see that there's a big risk in dispersing. So how do you see focus and hybrid in building this hybrid future?
Well, there are many things that you said that I'd like to comment about. First, a lot of people think about equilibrium, and they think equilibrium is static. And again, you're a scientist. You know there are dynamic equilibriums, chemical reactions. You put H2, molecule of H2, molecule of O2, you make water. And everybody thinks that this is a unilateral, unidirectional reaction. But this is actually an equilibrium, even if it's very, spontaneous, very enthalpic,
Yes.
very forced towards making water. But there's always water being dissociated automatically, and then there's molecules that get back together. So there's an equilibrium. And if you heat the water, or you change the pressure, the equilibrium is going to go shift more one way or the other. So equilibrium can be dynamic. And I think that a more dynamic world is a world where anything spreads faster. So if a reaction happens faster, it reaches the whole medium faster. So it can reach a new equilibrium faster. So we're making a very dynamic world where things propagate fast, when reactions happen fast. So you can have multiple identities. And in this hybrid world, I talked about the richness, the humanity in keeping what's the traditional alive, in keeping what's local alive, what's physical alive, but having the tools to propagate what's good, and having the tools to detect what's not good and stop it from propagating. That's what really matters, right? So again, it's inevitable, and it can be very good that we deploy the capacity and the technology to allow people to 3D print anything, or to sequence whatever genome, and to run any kind of code anywhere, without the need for huge investment. What's important is to be able to observe what's going on in different parts of the world and detect what's good and grow it, would detect what's not good and stop it. You talked about redundancy, and I'm an absolute believer that redundancy is good, because redundancy leaves space for creativity. So the old way to run things was that the mastermind was at the top, and he was more experienced than anyone, and this group would come up with an idea, and then they would deploy it down. This is a totalitarian state, and this is a old-fashioned CEO, right? Like very in charge of everything and very autocratic. And I'll give you an example. You would define the new technology platform of the company, and you would spend millions of euros, and then you would deploy it down the company. It would take years, and it would be a huge investment, very risky investment. Technology is not penetrating like that in companies anymore, even in consumers. If you look at your phone, you probably have 2 or 3 different messaging platforms at the same time. And none of them is actually winning, but they're all dynamics. They're all in dynamic progression. So they see what the other is doing and they improve their platform. And then they copy each other. And then they improve each other. So they kind of compete. And they propagate really fast thanks to this digital economy. So the same thing is happening in companies. Instead of choosing one solution and then deploying it slowly to everybody, you allow redundancy. So you allow different softwares to do the same thing inside your company, and you let them grow and see which one spreads faster, which reaction becomes more spontaneous, more aggressive. And this can be dynamic because this piece of software that you're using today may not be useful tomorrow. So I'm a big believer in innovation that happens from the bottom and that goes up, and that you allow to propagate. And in the role of the leader is no longer to decide what's better, is to have the data to decide which one is performing better. And this is really important. This is the basis of agile organizations, of having people running experiments, and whatever experiments turn out to do better, you propagate them. And in order to demonstrate which one is done better, you need to come up with the data. And the interesting thing is that we now have data of a lot of things. So how are we going to build agile societies, agile education systems, agile companies? That's what the future is about.
One of the other things that you said that I wanted to ask you is, you mentioned these companies with a vision on the short term that have to reward the shareholders, and because of that they choose CEOs so it's a kind of vicious circle, let's say, that keeps focusing on the short term. At the same time, and I remember this from 2014 from a talk from the during the Eisenhower program, that John Brown said Amazon expects to have most of their profit in the next 5 years from things that they didn't invent yet, and the shareholders are okay with that. Actually, that's what they want. So it's okay if you don't share profit through this period, because it's actually this long-term view that is building value to the stock, right? And it's a completely different, or at least it's an outlier on the way most companies and stocks function. And do you think it will take, and of course Amazon and the alikes became a kind of gravity center, and they are attracting this kind of shareholders, right? People that share the same beliefs and interests. But you still see S&P 500, like as a solid entity, let's say. So let's say the old school thoughts is still there, is still valuable to a lot of shareholders. So in the end, do you think is the CEO, are the shareholders, is this competition going to are they going to coexist in this hybrid world, or because they are so antagonist, right?
I think I always recommend an article from Harvard Business Review called "Strategy in the Age of Superabundant Capital," and what this article says is that innovation has been speeding up since the beginning of time, but something happened in 2008 that made innovation change forever, and made innovation more dynamic than ever before. To me, there are 2 events. The first is in 2007, Apple introduces the iPhone. which has been the most important vehicle for the globalization of the internet. So this has been really the start of the internet revolution, because smartphones have allowed us to bring most of the population online, and they still have a lot of work to do, but the world has radically changed because of the launch of smartphones. And the second thing is, in 2008, when the crisis comes, governments dump huge amounts of money in the system to keep it alive. And this has a profound implication on how companies behave. So the digital revolution, coupled with a lot of money, has made a big difference. What the article from Harvard Business Review explains is that, and it shows a graph of, and let me see if I can explain it only with words, but it explains how much a company grows in value, how much it grows in the stock market, the capitalization of the company, if you become 1% more efficient by reducing your costs, by being excellent at what you do, by efficiency. What the article explains is that depending on how what the market situation is, the behavior of companies is very, very different. When you invest, when capital was expensive, it was most profitable to make the company grow in value by reducing costs, right? And as capital became more available and more and cheaper, the benefit of growing or the impact of growing the company through reducing costs remains the same. But when you increase sales, the value of the company multiplies, and the effect is 4 or 5 times larger. I can send you the graph later. But basically what it says is that from 2008...
I'm already downloading it. I'm already accessing the article.
Okay, so in 2008, for the first time we see that the cost of capital reaches a level so low that's never been seen before in history. And the values of companies multiply by 4 or by 5 if what they do is, instead of being more efficient, they try to grow faster. Okay, so now speed of growth hacking, globalizing, innovating, going international, going global, becomes much more important than becoming efficient. Now, think about MBA programs, baby boomer mentality. Most of the leadership skills that we had in the past were focused on building efficiency, excellence, quality, all these things that you were studying in old MBAs. And you'll see these MBAs, these leaders that are trying to make their company more efficient. And actually the article says they will gain by a value of 6%. When leaders that are making their companies go digital, go global, innovate faster, and go to new markets are growing by 27%. So 6 compared to 27. And a lot of leaders tell me, 6% growth is fine. And I tell them no, because if your competitor is growing by 27, you become irrelevant. You disappear from the market. And my feeling is that, the older generations are in power and they have this mentality of efficiency, while the younger generations and the younger companies are following this, very aggressive, digital-oriented, growth hacking model that is much more innovative, that is much more tolerant with mistakes, that runs experiments with redundancy, as you said, and these guys are going to take the whole space. So you very often see very, important organizations. It can be agencies, it can be governments, it can be companies, that in their leadership teams only have people with the skills of the older generation. And that is very dangerous. That is, you become old as a society, you become old as a system, you become old as a company, and you become irrelevant. And then you disappear, or you become poor, or poorer, So it is important that we recognize that we are in a much more dynamic world, and we need a hybrid of people in teams, people looking at the past and maintaining excellence and order and efficiency. But we need new brains, new people looking at the future. Long term, we need to give them money, we need to give them power to invest in that. We need to give them commitment to support them. and tell them, if we're giving you money to go to Mars, we're ready to wait for 10 years. And 10 years to go to another planet is not a lot, but we're going to give you 10 years, even if the stock goes down, because we know that in the long term, this is going to work. So companies that look at efficiency, but at the same time are thinking about settling in Mars, have a much better capacity to stay alive and thrive in the next years. And actually, this has spun a great movement, especially in the US. Eric Ries, the founder of the Lean Startup movement, has created the long-term stock exchange. And Luke Nosek and some other founders of PayPal have created something called the Giga Fund. And the Giga Fund has the same perspective as the long-term stock exchange. They're saying, if we're able to keep the company well-funded and focused, you said focused before,
Yes.
if you focus on the long term without having to care about reporting to investors and whatever somebody build a better product long term. So if you're going to do something important for humanity, if you're selling a product that's big enough, if you're trying to build a company that's just big enough so that it can be rewarding to your investors in this world today, you have to have this DNA in your leadership, you have to have this DNA in your investors, and you have to have this DNA in the guys making the law and the rules of the game. So take a look at the long-term stock exchange, Giga Fund, and going back to the last example you said, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, they have the size. And I was speaking about size before. The guys with the size have an advantage in this new world. They did before, but they now have even more.
Okay, I was going to leave this question for later, but you mentioned size again. Are you following what's happening in El Salvador with the adoption of Bitcoin as legal tender? So El Salvador is very small, but I see this, choosing Bitcoin with all the controversy that still exists around, but it is a bold movement and it's a long-term choice that I don't know that people realize how long-term choice this is and how this can hack their growth and their future. So like if you feel comfortable talking a little bit about this, because when you talked about size, and I tend to agree with you, but then okay, what does the small ones can do? And I think that maybe they have even to take like riskier bets, right?
I think my personal opinion is that it's too early.
Growth.
I mean, I think it's too early to play with a country like that. I think it's irresponsible, and it may be a desperate measure, but I think it's too risky, too irresponsible, and there are many things about Bitcoin that can go wrong. From the sustainability side, from the safety side, from the long-term existence. So I think it's too early, but it's definitely something worth looking at. In my opinion, actually, one of the most interesting things that has happened government-wise regarding technology is what our colleague Arvind Gupta is doing in India with the project India Stack. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but you should definitely have Arvind in your podcast to explain about it.
I will. But some people would argue that it's exactly to prevent what things that happen in India during this process that you should choose Bitcoin, for example. And I don't want to advocate in a favor or in favor or against, but what I think that your comment should be like in comparison to what, right? So it may be premature, but compare it to what? In the sense, if you are in a really bad place, then maybe a riskier bet is your best bet. So how do you see this in comparison to what? Like, do you think there are situations or contexts that require a bolder bet or not?
There's another article from Harvard Business Review that talks about the timing for disruptive technologies to come in the market. It's called Right Bet, Wrong Time, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And gives a couple of examples about how technologies get adopted. And you have the size of the projection you want to have for this adoption, how many users, how big the use of this technology is going to be, and the functionality it needs to cover, how complicated the functionality has to go. So you have, for example, the beginning of the internet with ARPANET that once had one single use for very few computers. So that's like the lower corner. Very few computers or very low functionality, very low use. Then you can have much more users with limited functionality. For example, if you use the internet inside a closed environment, inside a corporation, for example, a larger network of computers, like a science research lab, it would still be a closed environment. So there are little alterations or little unexpected things that can happen. And the functionality is still limited. Then you can increase in size or you can increase in functionality. The internet we're using today has a lot of functionality. You can play games, you can stream video, you can pay, you can do financial transactions, you can do many, many things. So if you're increasing in both angles at the same time, this becomes very dangerous because you're very prone for error to happen. So for me, the correct adoption of blockchain, if you're scaling it, is you either open the doors for new functionality to be used in different types of commerce, different types of, for taxes or for B2B payments or to B2C payments, or if you open it to a wider network of payments for one single thing. So for me, for example, examples of use that are happening following the same structure that that the internet had are really interesting to look at. So use of blockchain in closed environments. And you would say you don't need that kind of tool like blockchain in a closed environment because you can provide security for transactions if the environment is closed. Okay, but you're still scaling the technology and seeing the limitations and the potential flaws, and then gradually increasing functionality. So using it for more complicated things. Probably the most complicated would be smart contracts. So smart contracts on an open environment would be the other corner of the ARPANET, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that before I used it as a nationwide spread tool with multiple potential transaction styles and different flows, I would open it, gradually to more and more types of uses and more users, so that I can detect potential problems easier.
Okay, this is such an interesting conversation. We could go on and on, but time is limited. So I'm going to ask you my survey questions, my rapid fire ones for us to before I let you go. What is the book that you are reading right now?
I have 3 books on my table.
You can show the 3 of them.
Okay, this one I've read 100 times. It's about how you can build a platform mindset inside an organization and how to structure the architecture of your organization as a platform. We can discuss another hour about this because I find it really.
Let me read it first, and then we do an episode on it.
This one from Tom Malone from the Collective Intelligence Lab at MIT, describing how we've gone from traditional organizations, shaped like a pyramid, very hierarchical, very bureaucratic, to agile organizations that we discussed before, that run experiments where people with different specializations or different skills work together in the same perspective, on the same objective, to liquid organizations, which is something that I work a lot on. As you know, my company Opinno works as a liquid consultancy. where you can have people that are coming from inside and outside your organization working together as an ecosystem. This is what any kind of open source company does, or most of the companies that are opening their developer platforms to the outside. So liquid companies. And to me, Superminds goes one step further, because the communities of the future, the networks of the future, are not only going to be made of people, they're going to be made of people and computers. And it's the merge between people and computers that is going to make us make better decisions and think better and build better organizations and better governments and better education and health systems. Very interesting. And you may not like so much. I'm reading about this guy, this Harvard professor that is doing research on increasing your life expectancy and all the technology that's happening now and that's being discovered to try to build a health system that is focused on health instead of disease, and how to keep you healthy for a longer time. And I'm really excited about the what's going to come in that sense, now that we have unlocked the technologies to be able to understand what's written in our genomes and be able to edit it. And we're still far away from that, but I think that we're going to see very interesting things in the next decade or so.
I'm of course very excited with this. It's going to be one of the areas that I'm going to focus on the next years. But I listened to this very interesting podcast where they were talking that one of the biggest challenges of this new health industry, and not disease industry, is regulatory, because we know how all the regulatory agencies to approve a new medicine are designed. All the regulatory systems are designed to approve, to measure the efficiency of something against the disease, not against improvement of health. And this may be the single largest challenge to develop this new medicine or drugs and actually achieve the result of increasing life expectancy, because they are not there's no system to regulate them. And I do have a few ideas around how to hack this that would also get us another episode.
I think certainly that the future in the area of biotech is the most exciting, and at the same time the most scary, because as we talked about, the redundancy, legal systems and regulations in every country are going to be different, and some countries will have different ethics, and but innovation is low, so let's see where this leads us.
And some countries may adopt maybe too early or in a riskier way those things too. What do you take, long or short lunch breaks?
Very short.
Very short.
Very short, but I take a short lunch break, but I take a big work break, just because I need to take care of the kids at lunchtime.
I take the night shift with the kids, so like I'm stopping working earlier to take the night shift. I used to be like a night bird and work a lot at night, but now that changed completely. The last question is about Bitcoin, if you are a believer or not, and maybe you can add something on what we already talked about El Salvador.
Not really. I'm not an expert. I just think that this is the early stages.
Do you have some Bitcoin or some cryptocurrency?
No, not really.
Okay.
But I think that is a very exciting technology, and again, for like most technologies, we need to see how it's adopted, to see if it's the right time, and if you find the right use for that technology. It may not be Bitcoin. It may be some kind of smart contract that we still haven't figured out.
Okay.
But let's see.
That's it, Pedro. Thank you so much for is there anywhere that you would like people to, what is your preferred platform for people to get in touch with you? Is it email, LinkedIn, Twitter?
I'm usually on LinkedIn.
Okay.
So anybody who wants to connect, I'm happy to talk over there.
Thank you so much, and let's do it again some other time.
Of course. Thanks for inviting me.